I just wanted to tell the Daystar crew something really personal and heartfelt. Joni has been mum regarding the specifics of Marcus's dying moments for a long time. Reality, however, is slowly but surely emerging into view. What she chose not to discuss has caused a lot of people to question what transpired in the final hours. Joni's long-ago silence is now being recognized, and the things she has kept hidden could potentially alter everything. The shocking truth about Marcus's last moments is about to be revealed. Joany withheld information that will shock you to your very core. Christianity was rocked in November 2021 by the news of Marcus Lamb's death. During the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, Marcus was recognized for his courage, steadfast faith, and capacity to question the existing quo. No, he was more than that. He was a champion of truth, according to many, someone who refused to give in when pressured to do so. While some saw him as a hero, others saw him as a platform for doctors and professionals who challenged the dominant narratives. Scolded him. People regarded Marcus as a figure regardless of their thoughts about him. However, his devotees felt as if the world had collapsed when word got out that Marcus had died. His demise, linked to consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic, were abrupt and unanticipated. His health was not showing any signs of serious decline in public view. It appeared like business as usual on the day he died. He was already in a life-or-death struggle, but nobody knew it. Both the announcement and the accompanying sadness arrived suddenly. There was a huge hole in the ministry community when he passed away. Messages of condolence arrived from all corners. In memory of Marcus's courageous faith, pastors from across the United States shared heartfelt messages they had intended. People expressed their sorrow and shared memories of how Marcus had affected their lives on social media, while footage of his sermons played softly to music. There was no mistaking the tone. Millions of people saw Marcus Lamb as more than just a TV preacher. He was a courageous guy who had staked his life for the cause of Christ. We summoned you back to this room. You have 24 hours from the time we sign this to speak with Don. Around 2:30 to 3 o'clock is when it falls, in the future. Return to Arnold's office if you are able to sign that. The document needs to be signed. All right, make sure you're okay with it by reading it thoroughly, and then tomorrow sign the document. You need to about the time I would say 3 o'clock. A whole day has passed since the moment of signing. If you don't, you're effectively turning yourself into an employee and stepping down from your positions as vice president and board member. No longer are you an employee. Our meeting place really are. The loss was obvious in the early days. Marcus and his wife Joni's network, Dayar, received an overwhelming number of supportive comments. People who watched felt as if they had lost a loved one. The flood of affection and the grief was genuine and emotional. Something else, however, was subtly but surely coming to light behind the surface of the public mourning. People began to realize that something wasn't quite right as the weeks passed. Increasingly loud murmurs were heard in the corridors of Hello Dayar, details that were taboo to bring up in public. Behind the scenes, why were things happening so fast? After losing her husband, Joany seemed to be acting very composed. What gave her that impression had a deeper meaning beyond what any understood, right? The passing of Marcus was more than a passing for those who had known him intimately. A chapter was coming to a close, but it wasn't the kind of loss they were expecting. The death of Marcus was more than simply a leader's departure. The scene seemed to mark the start of brand new material. Those in the know couldn't help but question whether there was more going on behind the scenes as the globe mourned. They began inquiring about things. Had his illness truly come on that suddenly? Furthermore, for what reasons why is Dayar experiencing such a dramatic change, leaving little room for appropriate grieving following the untimely passing of Marcus Lamb in November 2021? Dayar, the network he and his wife Joany had painstakingly constructed, felt the tremors of the shock. Under Marcus's leadership, Dayar's visage, the ministry's beating heart. His leadership had been marked by courage, conviction, and an original vision that touched the lives of millions. Not only did his passing affect his loved ones, but it also shattered the hearts of his many admirers and fans. However, the events that unfolded in the subsequent days and weeks were completely unexpected. Joany, Marcus's wife of decades, appeared remarkably calm while the world lamented his death. Of course she was grieving, but nobody saw it coming from her. A widow who had recently lost her spouse, ministry partner, and children's biological father was the public's perception of her. Some changes were taking place at Dayar, though behind the scenes. It seemed like a change was taking place, something that nobody had foreseen. Almost soon, Joni assumed the role of leader. She didn't put herself last as she mourned. Rather, she pressed on with renewed vigor, executing Dayar with an eerie level of precision that frightened many. Longtime associates of Marcus and Joni's were abandoned. Dayar was moving swiftly to make decisions following Marcus's death, while others wondered, was she already prepared for this moment? Had she anticipated it? Was she already moving on while the world was still trying to comprehend the depth of the loss? There was a dramatic reorganization of staff members who had worked closely with Marcus throughout the years. Things started moving forward at a breakneck pace for projects that had been stalled for months if not years. Things that Marcus had previously put on hold or discarded were revived. The mood in the workplace has changed as well. There was an apparent air of urgency, as if time was of the essence in place of the previous laid-back collaborative vibe. Because, technically, you were not here, we needed to make a motion to accomplish that. I was already removed from your list. That is, since it was not you who did it. You did, in fact, distance yourself from across the surface. The vice president was dismissed from office. She asked us to give you 24 hours to think about it, and we agreed. Then Dayar will write you a letter explaining the circumstances. Would you like to join me? Do you see the point? Get it? You have till 3 o'clock tomorrow to do as you like, pray, chat, etc., and then return to Arnold's office to study the document until you're ready to sign it. If you put your name on it, it will bind us both, just as it will bind everyone else. You are no longer an official of Dayar and no longer a member of the board if you refuse to sign it. Personally, I wouldn't have gone that far. She would make that choice. The result is that's the result of your decision not to sign it. His point is that this board was unable to expel you. Not only was the rate of change cause for concern, but your choice to not sign will eliminate it. The way Joanie carried herself was the key. Her leadership style was composed, methodical, and unexpectedly forceful. She was absolutely spot on. She seemed more determined and powerful than before. Many assumed she would require space to grieve, think things out, and take some room to think about what had transpired. She instead assumed leadership. Joanie didn't sound like a bereaved widow in the internal meetings. It sounded like someone who was completely master of her realm. Nobody drew back or hesitated. Hi there. Joanie felt a new sense of confidence in his decision-making abilities. Some employees were fired, others put into other positions, while still others were reassigned. A lot of people felt like things were heading in a pre-planned route because of how quickly and dramatically everything changed when Marcus passed away. For other long-term workers, it was like something wasn't quite right. Feelings of loss and introspection were completely out of place. A new age seemed to be beginning at that very moment. A lot of people were wondering if Joanie was prepared for this in advance. Did she have time to psychologically, emotionally, and maybe even spiritually prepare herself for Marcus's death? Some people were wondering if there was more going on behind the scenes because of how quickly Joanie took charge. Was she aware that Marcus's condition was worse than anyone had disclosed? Staff members acknowledged that, despite Marcus's voice appearing on broadcasts, they hadn't seen him in the studio for weeks prior to his passing. Nobody seemed to question his disappearance, yet it was noticed. Did his health deterioration really happen that quickly? Or if there had been indicators of danger, someone wished to recognize? The way Joanie carried herself just added to the intrigue. The world watched as she grieved as a widow, but she didn't seem as devastated as everyone expected. Nobody lost it or had a public breakdown. She appeared almost too calm instead. Even though a terrible event had just transpired, Joanie seemed completely unfazed by it, according to some members of staff. She was unfazed, and her poised demeanor seemed to add to the mystery. It appeared as though she had reconciled with the events and was moving on from them. It was difficult for family members and close friends to overlook the change in leadership. For many years, they had been inseparable from Marcus and Joanie at work. Through Marcus's meticulous administration of the ministry, they had witnessed his level of involvement in the decision-making process and his influence over Dayar's leadership. It seemed as if a void had been opened up after his death. However, Joanie wasted no time at all filling it. There was more to it than that. She was taking over for her late spouse. For many, her transition into the position of power seemed overly polished, orchestrated, and quick. Initially, the whispering was quite low volume. The ease with which Joanie assumed leadership and the speed with which she took charge were both praised. Nobody really questioned her leadership skills. The timing was perfect. It was way too easy, way too planned. Was Joanie ready for this moment? That was a question that started to circulate. Had she anticipated Marcus's demise, not merely in the midst of his husband, but as Dayar's chief? The more significant inquiries followed. Was Joanie's apparent foreknowledge of the impending leadership role predicated on her ability to handle the situation before Marcus's death? Had she been secretly arranging things to play this part in the months preceding his passing? There were others who began to wonder if Marcus had known what was going on behind the scenes. Had he read the signposts? Did he notice that Joanie's viewpoint had changed? She was already assuming a leadership role and making her mark in that were difficult to disregard. People began to notice that Joanie was different from the woman they had known earlier as time went on. She was more than simply a widow in mourning. A lady with a strategy. She was powerful and decisive. This strategy was developing at a rate that exceeded all expectations. Some people felt like there was only ever going to be one path for everything to go. The murder of Marcus served as the icing on the cake. It was about more than just Joanie taking the lead. All the way through cultural transformation inside the ministry, a new tone became apparent to those inside Dayar. Meetings were now more formal. The dynamics amongst employees had transformed. It wasn't merely that Joanie had assumed leadership. She was guiding in that direction. There was absolutely no space for doubt, no some uncertainty. Many were forced to wonder, was this all planned long before Marcus's passing? The shift was unnerving for those who had worked alongside Marcus because of the swiftness and authority with which judgments were handed down. Their eyes had beheld his indefatigable work ethic in creating Dayar, his meticulous attention to detail, and the palpable impact he made on every step of the journey. Everyone could feel that Joanie was filling his shoes swiftly and firmly now that he was gone, and it was not the expected natural evolution. The velocity Joanie's forceful movements throughout the shift and the seeming ease with which everything fell into place unnerved those around her. This was not the behavior of a bereaved wife. There was an air of a lady seizing control, her demeanor so deliberate it seemed scripted. Purpose. Some employees felt like something had been started before Marcus had even gone away, and it persisted while Joanie proceeded with restructuring, new consultants, and important decisions. In spite of their lack of certainty, Joanie's behavior, the judgments she made, and the timing all appeared thus. Her lack of preparation for the new role made them question whether she had foreseen the change. The public, Dayar employees and viewers were all deeply saddened by Marcus Lamb's untimely passing in November 2021. Marcus had stood up as an example of courageous faith and had endured in the face of innumerable public challenges. The retina. His death marked the conclusion of an era for his loved ones, but it also marked a turning point in the ministry he co-founded with his wife Joanie. His wife, Joanie in particular, was the object of many unsolved mysteries that he left behind in the wake of his death. She had been Marcus's rock for decades, and the world had regarded her as the devoted wife and partner. They had worked hand in hand to build Dayar, and to many she exemplified steadfast faith, love, and commitment. Something started to happen, though, in the weeks after he passed away. Seemed strange. There was a noticeable change in the inner workings of Dayar throughout the outpouring of tributes, burial services, and global mourning, which many found disturbing. Instead of wallowing in her sorrow, Joanie took charge. It was quick, clear, and eerily calculated for some. After Marcus's death, Joanie's sudden and dominant presence caused others to wonder. She was supposed to take a break from the spotlight for a while to grieve and mourn, as everyone had anticipated. On the contrary, she made decisions with lightning speed. Initiatives that some things that Marcus had previously put on hold or relegated were brought back to life. In addition to reorganizing Dayar's leadership roles, new meetings were planned. The mood of the group changed from casual to serious, and it seemed as though the ministry's machinery had already begun to turn even though Marcus hadn't been present. Underneath it all, Joanie was the most intriguing aspect of this change. Her expression remained composed. She didn't appear to be emotionally distraught or breaking down. On the contrary, she exuded an air of tranquility, composure, and quietude. Her deeds had a reason, but some couldn't help but wonder if the public was being led astray. The rumors started at that point. It all began with hushed conversations amongst the employees. Next, it started in order to blossom. A journal, specifically Joni's personal diary, was the topic of conversation. It was meant to remain hidden, but elements of it started to surface nevertheless. A small group of reliable insiders, including former employees and long-term associates of the Lamb family, began talking about what it contains. The pages of the journal started making the rounds in whispers, and the questions they posed became impossible to ignore, even though they weren't happy to share it. The tone was unexpected, according to those who claimed to have seen or read some of it. It wasn't filled with anger or hidden truths, but it was nonetheless disturbing. It appeared like the postings showed a new side of Joanie. She was not the type of widow who publicly mourned her husband's death. Truth be told, she looked emotionally cold. A woman who appeared emotionally detached was depicted in the diary entries written months before to Marcus's passing. The diary entries had an air of tranquility, even dispassionate. The more individuals read about it, the more unnerving it got. The woman who had always been seen alongside Marcus, Joanie, now appeared to be recording a gradual, almost systematic estrangement. Just weeks before to Marcus's hospitalization, the first entry grabbed notice. The words were powerful despite their brevity and simplicity. Excess fat. The picture is finally starting to take shape. I simply must maintain my silence. Soak it all in. There is a God who watches. Anyone who had been around during Marcus and Joanie's tense months before his death. This particular entry was bold. The words didn't fit the profile of a heartbroken wife whose husband was sick. As if that had concluded the whole affair, it sounded more like someone who had accepted the situation for what it was. A person with prior preemptively embraced what was to come. Someone felt uneasy reading a prior entry that detailed the condition of their domestic life. As Joanie put it, he isn't listening anymore, not to me, and our home life is quiet in all the wrong ways. No one. The readers retained these words in their minds. They didn't sound like they came from a grieving mother. They came out of the mouth of someone who had emotionally severed ties with her husband a long time ago. The public's perception of Joanie and Marcus as a cohesive unit was severely damaged by these remarks. The truth about what was going on behind closed doors. What worried me, though, wasn't merely the physical separation of their hearts. For what this entry, written a few days prior to Marcus's hospitalization, caused many to begin raising serious questions, almost mysterious. It was brief. The picture is finally starting to take shape. I simply must maintain my silence. Soak it all in. There is a God who watches. The remarks could be seen as a moment of spiritual contemplation, a surrender to God's will, at first glance. However, these comments held far greater significance for those privy to the affairs of the Lamb family. Instead of someone who was actually doing anything, it sounded more like they were waiting for something to happen. Startled by it, Joanie seemed to have spiritually, emotionally, and maybe even practically accepted Marcus's fate before anybody else understood what was going on. As excerpts from Joanie's journal made their way around, they revealed a lady who had progressed beyond grief and into a new phase of her life. It appeared as though she had come to terms with the fact that Dyer's future and her own would be distinct. Although the precise circumstances surrounding Joanie's emotional breakdown remain unclear, it was undeniable that her diary hinted at something more profound than her outward image. Among the resignation seemed to be the prevailing theme among the entries. The more the staff read, the more it seemed like Joanie had already accepted the changes in her life and the ministry before Marcus's death, and she appeared emotionally distant. The diary's discovery did more than simply set off inquiries regarding the emotional condition of Joanie. The rapidity of the change at Dyer was also cast into doubt by this. Had Joanie anticipated this moment? People started to wonder. Had she been prepared for Marcus's death on a spiritual, emotional, and cerebral level before it happened? Is there a bigger picture here? The question of her ability to command Dyer was resolved.
It came down to whether the changeover was moving at a snail's pace or if it was overly planned out. The speed with which Joanie took over Dyer had many people questioning whether she had foreseen this moment much earlier than anyone had thought. The hushed murmurs intensified. Dyer employees who had been there for a while started to wonder why everything was happening at this particular time. For what reason was Joanie acting so hastily? Why maintain such composure? When Marcus passed away, why was she so determined to change the direction of the ministry? It seemed like the ministry was undergoing a reorganization even before the people had finished their morning commute. Suddenly, projects that Marcus had temporarily halted were once again in the limelight. Joanie presided over, her decisions made with an air of almost scripted certainty. Still, the most perplexing thing was how much did Marcus know? Did he sense that he and Joanie were becoming more and more separated? He was feel as though their relationship was evolving. Were his feelings for her aware of the strain on their relationship? Or was he absorbed in his work, his purpose, and his struggle to see the warning signals that were become apparent to everyone else? Despite the lack of official confirmation, the journal had a chilling effect. Sense of inevitableness. As far as anyone could tell, Joanie had been making plans for the future for quite some time. The exposed journal entries became a metaphor for all that had been concealed. Emotional remoteness was a topic of conversation, surrender, of a lady who had before embraced an unforeseen destiny. The entries painted a different picture of Joanie, despite their serene and dispassionate tone. There was more to her than being a bereaved widow. She had emotionally and mentally moved on before she even started. Everyone was still in a state of grief. And as time passed, the only question that left was straightforward. What really transpired to cause Marcus's demise? Just what was Joanie aware of? Even while it didn't reveal all, the diary did pave the way to a complexity of truth that is deeper. There was more to it than just Marcus's untimely demise. It focused on the change that came next and the lady who became leader after it. The revelation of Joanie's private journal altered perspectives on the shift at Dyer in more ways than one. Their perception of Joanie shifted as a result.